Hi friends, I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker and welcome to Let's Talk Tropics here on Acadiana Weather Today. It is a Tuesday and we've got kind of a busy one out there with a potential tropical cyclone out in the Bay of Campeche and the potential to bring some decent rains to at least parts of Acadiana. Right now it looks like most of the heavy stuff is going to be heading over to the Lone Star State, but it could be a busy couple of weeks here according to the model, so we'll get to that in just a little bit. It is a sticky one out there today in Acadiana, and there is some light rain and drizzle out there. Nothing super heavy right now, just some of that nuisance rain, and that might cause a few problems on the roadways. Temperatures are running in the mid-80s under mostly cloudy skies. Well, we'll go ahead and get right to it. Potential tropical cyclone number 1 is currently out in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, better known as the Bay of Campeche, and the area is right about in there. Reconnaissance aircraft were out there earlier today, kind of having a hard time finding a closed center of circulation, and it does appear that some of the stronger winds are kind of offset from that center of circulation, so they're maintaining it as a potential tropical cyclone, not a tropical depression nor a tropical storm just yet. Now here's the floater satellite. So you'll see the satellite move as the satellite will be following kind of the center of circulation, but it's a very broad area of circulation now. Starting to look a little bit better organized, I would say, on the satellite imagery, but again, because this is such a large, broad circulation, we're having a hard time pinpointing perhaps exactly where the center may be. And whenever you have developing tropical systems like that, you sometimes will see the center of circulation develop in a number of different places. Their last check on the reconnaissance aircraft had a center probably right about in this area here, but sometimes you might see a low-level circulation out in different parts of that area. So For the next couple of, let's say, 12 to 24 hours will be critical with the information that we get from the reconnaissance aircraft. One plane out there earlier today heading back home, and another one will be heading out there, if not already on the way. So we'll be getting more information. And what's great about getting the information from the reconnaissance aircraft is all of this weather data from directly inside this system then starts to get thrown into the computer models. And since the computer models will have more data, they can make a much better, much more accurate forecast for where it's going to go and what the impacts will be. So here is the latest. Potential tropical cyclone number 1 is at 21.8 north and 92.7 west, and the numbers are there on the left-hand side of your screen as well. Winds estimated to be about 40 miles per hour. Reconnaissance aircraft finding some higher winds offset from the center, and the minimum pressure still holding at 999 millibars. But the planes out there might have found some pressures just slightly lower, not anything real significant. But we'll get more information. We'll get another update on the position and the strength of this particular system at about 1 o'clock, and then we'll get a full discussion as well as a full advisory that comes down at 4 o'clock later this afternoon. So I'll update those on social media a little bit later in the day. Looking at the major hurricane models, you can see pretty much everything is in agreement to bring the center of circulation onto the Mexican coastline, perhaps there south of the Rio Grande Valley, although there are some outliers that still try to bring this into deep South Texas, but really they've zeroed in on a pretty small area of the coast. But remember, because this is such a broad area of circulation, the impacts of this tropical system are going to be a lot farther than where that actual line goes. And looking at some of the intensity models here, showing that it's already, with those winds, perhaps they're at just around 40 miles per hour. So if it were to be a real tropical cyclone and have all of the characteristics, it would already have the name Alberto. But it is showing, at least in these models, generally all of them are in agreement here that we're going to be seeing at least tropical storm force conditions going out to about 72 hours. And after day 3, which is about this line right here, it would be interacting with land. And then you can see all the projections bring the winds considerably lower once it reaches land. Now, this is kind of a busy map, I understand, with a lot of data on here, but this is what we're looking at when it comes to the recon. So over on this side of the chart here, this is determining wind speed at the flight level as well as the pressure, and then you see everything kind of goes off the charts over here. And the reason is everything basically past this line and off this way is the plane heading back home. So it's going higher in the atmosphere, therefore higher winds, and they stop taking the pressures. But you can see here 997 on the pressure. They had a few of those there. Wind speeds, which is the blue line, not really exceeding much more than maybe 20 knots or so. So nothing too significant there. Of course, the temperatures of the dew points, it's a very moist atmosphere. We know that for sure. And then if you look over here at this particular side on the lower right, you can see that they were flying pretty low. And then as they headed home, they've reached those higher altitudes to head on back home. But there will be another flight going out very soon. Like I said, if not, it may already be on its way, and we'll get some more information from inside this tropical system, which will help the computer models determine what the effects are going to be. Now, locally, we're going to see more indirect impacts when it comes to tropical cyclone number 1, and most of that is going to be concentrated along the coast. So we are expecting some coastal flooding over Cameron Parish, where we currently now have a coastal flood warning. That's in the darker greens, and then the lighter greens that you have here over Vermilion, Iberia into St. Mary, that's a coastal flood advisory. At Calcasieu Pass, they're talking about the tides perhaps being as much as 3 feet above mean high water levels. So what your average high tide is, add 3 feet to that. Therefore, you're going to see some coastal flooding of some of the roadways there, especially LA 82, down there between Cameron and going over to Sabine Pass. And then also could be some coastal flooding of some roadways as you get closer to the coast there in Iberia and St. Mary, particularly over to around Sycamore Point. You'll probably have some higher water levels during high tide. Seen it before. A lot of times the water can get out of the canal and eventually reach some of the roadways. But minor coastal flooding for Iberia, St. Mary, as well as Vermilion Parish is probably running about 1.5 to 2 feet above normal on those high tide levels. Now, from the National Hurricane Center, there is a flood risk, and whenever you get a weak tropical system like this and something that's slow moving, they do tend to produce a lot of rain. And right now, the greatest flood threat is going to be the central coast of Texas and then inland to about San Antonio, and the flood risk still exists all the way to the Rio Grande Valley. And those western parts of Texas really don't get a lot of rain as you start to get into June and July. Things really tend to dry up. So on one side, that will help them out because drought conditions always seem to kick in with fire season later in the season there over western Texas. But the bad news is these areas aren't able to handle a lot of heavy rain in a short period of time. Therefore, there would be a flood threat. So day one looks like that. Day two, this goes on through Friday morning, or rather Thursday morning here across central Texas. So there's your through Thursday, and then by Friday, you can see that most of the action will be moving away from Louisiana. So we're just under a little bit of a risk, especially there over Cameron and extreme southern portions of Vermilion Parish. According to our local weather office here in Lake Charles, most of the heavy stuff is going to be out here along the Texas Gulf Coast, 2, possibly up to 6 inches of rain. And some of that might encroach onto portions of Cameron and Vermilion parishes. But you can see most of Acadiana here is going to see anywhere between, say, maybe 1/10 of an inch to maybe up to 2 inches of rain getting down toward the coast. So not super significant, but it will be on and off rain probably for the next several days. And as you can see here on the current radar, we do have quite a bit of rain that's out there. Most of it is light rain, but if we zoom it out here and we take a look at what's going on out as far as the radar can reach, there is quite a bit of moderate to heavy rain out here in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico, and a lot of this is going to be heading off toward the northwest. So again, Cameron and CAMPECHE and Vermilion parishes, and then the upper Texas counties there over the Lone Star State will have a better chance of seeing those significant rains here over the next several days. So the tropical weather outlook, this is kind of an interesting map because we already have potential tropical cyclone number 1. But what's strange about this map is you see that it's still circled in yellow when normally it should be red. But this is actually talking about over the next 7 days where another tropical system could potentially develop there over the Bay of Campeche once one moves over toward the Mexican coast. We also have an area here over the western Atlantic, kind of a low that cut off from a cold front that was out over the Atlantic, has broken off, and it will kind of slide off toward the west-northwest, potentially bringing some tropical-like conditions to the southeast coast of Florida, Georgia, and into the Carolinas. So let's look and see if there's anything else to worry about out there. I will tell you, though, this broad area of low pressure that's now over Central America is really going to be sticking around, and there's a ton of moisture that's out there. Flooding rains are going to be likely again over Central America. Again, good news, bad news kind of a thing. Good news, they've been in drought condition. Bad news is that they're expecting a lot of rain that would cause flooding. So this area I still think is going to stay somewhat active here over the next week or two, as there's just going to be a ton of moisture out here in the western part of the Caribbean. You got another tropical wave that's entering the eastern part of the Caribbean, and that's going to go ahead and move off toward the west as well, and could add a little fuel to the fire maybe a week to a week and a half down the road. And as we look even farther out into the Atlantic Ocean, there's that tropical wave about ready to come into the Caribbean. You got another one here and still another one out here, and another one that's coming off of the Atlantic or the African coast that I'll show you here in just a minute. But there's quite a bit of dry air, and there's also some Saharan dust that's out over the far eastern Atlantic. Here's this next tropical wave coming off the African coast, which you can see up here. There's a whole bunch of Saharan dust and probably some dry air that's kind of encroaching here on the central part of the Atlantic. So even though this over here looks pretty robust as it's coming off the African coast, I have a feeling it's going to look more like that as it moves out into the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean. So there are other things out there, and there is the potential that we could see additional development here over the next couple of weeks. Just look at the water temperatures. Virtually everywhere in the development zone should be able to sustain a tropical system just based on the water temperatures. Now, the numbers that you're seeing in here are in Celsius, so your magic number is 27. You see the 27s there, 27s out here. That is 80 degrees Fahrenheit, so everything above that would be above that 80-degree threshold. So no problems with development in the Gulf, no problems with water temperatures in the Caribbean, and even the western part of the Atlantic and areas over around the Bahamas are primed for any tropical systems to work with. They got plenty of fuel. Then on top of that, we still have some high heat potential. So if you haven't been on Let's Talk Tropics before, this map doesn't just indicate what the water temperatures are at the surface, but it also looks at the water temperatures going deep below the surface. And the more of that there is, the more 80-degree water below, the higher your heat potential is. So basically the entire Caribbean Sea and much of the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And I will note there's some slightly warmer temperatures here over the Bay of Campeche when it comes to tropical cyclone heat potential. Not anything like we're seeing here over the northern Caribbean or the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, but definitely could be a bit of a factor to bring some strengthening to a developing tropical system. So now that we've kind of gone over number one, what else is out there? So we're just going to look at the GFS model. I'm going to let it go ahead and run. So you see a low kind of developing again over the Bay of Campeche, and then another low trying to develop over the Yucatan, kind of heading up toward the northern Gulf Coast. Again, when we get out to Saturday, June the 29th, when you're talking a week and a half from today, there's really no chance that this map is going to look just like, that the actual weather is going to look just like this. We know that for a fact, but what we try to look at are the different trends, and especially if you start to see consistency from model run to model run to model run. So for the last maybe couple of days or whatever, the Gulf as well as the Western Caribbean, GFS, and even the Euro have tried to develop something in these areas. So at the very least, I think we're going to stay somewhat active. So there might be a couple of other systems to watch here. Doesn't look like anything super strong, but they could be big rainmakers. So that's kind of the big threat in the early part of the hurricane season. When you got a lot of wind shear out there, which we do today, tropical systems have a hard time developing, and they just become these big low pressure troughs, and they can tap into a lot of tropical moisture and sometimes can bring some very, very heavy rains wherever they go. So that right now I think would be our main threat over the next couple of weeks with any other developing tropical systems that might be out there. So that's a look at Let's Talk Tropics. I hope you enjoy this video. If you do, go ahead and like this one and subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications too. That way you know when the next weather forecast gets dropped, or when Let's Talk Tropics goes live, or if we do any severe weather coverage with our live stream anytime watches are posted. And of course that will come into play a lot more as we get deeper and deeper into the hurricane season. And thanks to everybody who subscribed, and tell your friends too. This is a very local weather forecast. It is specifically designed just for Acadiana, and I will let you know that all corporate decisions are made right here in my house, here in Lafayette, Louisiana. So if you're a little dissatisfied, as I've been seeing on social media from some of the local media outlets, you do know at least very much so that all corporate decisions are made right here in Acadiana and for Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you tomorrow morning on Acadiana Weather Today, sometime between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. Have a great day.